Did you get your invite from Apple? Notifications might be driving all of us insane, and Instagram is not as square as it used to be. Tech News Tonight is next.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Tonight, episode 412 for Thursday, August 27th, 2015. This episode of Tech News Tonight is brought to you by Braintree. If you're working on a mobile app and searching for a simple payment solution, check out Braintree. With one simple integration, you can offer your customers every way to pay. To learn more and for your first $50,000 in transactions fee-free, go to braintreepayments.com/technight. Welcome, I am Megan Maroney. Let's get to the tech news. Today, Apple officially sent out invitations to the traditional autumn iPhone event, which this year will be held on September 9th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We'll be streaming the event live on this network in our own special event hosted by our news director, Mike Elgin, Alex Lindsay of MacBreak Weekly, and yours truly. The invitations to the upcoming iPhone unveiling seem pretty standard, except that instead of hosting the event at the Yerba Buena Center in San Francisco, which holds 757 people, or the Flint Center, which holds 2,405 people, Apple is going all out this year. According to the invite, the event will be held at the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium in San Francisco, which seats a whopping 7,000 people. Why the change, Apple? You could ask Siri. Apple has called the iPhone unveiling, "Hey Siri, give me a hint." And in case you're wondering, Siri is not giving any hints, just her same old lame jokes. What can we expect from the event? 9 to 5 Mac, a blog with notoriously accurate sources, has a slew of new rumors today, including that one of the colors of the new iPhone 6s will be rose gold and not pink, as previously reported. The phones will also include a Force Touch display, support for recording video in full 4K resolution, a 12-megapixel rear camera, an updated front camera with support for flash lighting. Check out 9 to 5 Mac if you want a rundown of the rest of what they think they might possibly know. This afternoon, Mark Zuckerberg announced that every person in the world, except my husband, are on Facebook. Well, not every person in the world, but on Monday, the social networking site reached a new milestone when, for the first time ever, 1 billion people used Facebook in a single day. That's right, 1 in 7 people on Earth used Facebook, mostly, I assume, to watch videos of goats in pajamas. That's what I do. And if that statistic weren't shocking enough, the company also announced that Instagram photos no longer have to be square. Now, I don't know about you, but I find this totally scary to have all that freedom, but it's true. Today, Instagram announced support for landscape and portrait photos, and that includes video also. Instagram says that while the square format has always been part of who they are, the visual story that you're trying to tell should come first. And by this, I mean I assume that they mean they're talking to me, as well as the stories told by the kind folks who advertise on Instagram and keep it free. Is this the Android phone you're looking for? Former Apple CEO John Scully hopes it is. Today, he announced the Obi World Phone, a line of mid-level, inexpensive international smartphones with a focus on unifying software and industrial design. The phone runs a custom user interface for Android created by San Francisco-based product studio Ammunition. The phones are affordable, $129 for 16 gigabytes and roughly $200 for 32 gigabytes. The company says the Obi World Phone is designed for discerning young people in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. It is a pretty phone, I will admit, but can you love Steve Jobs as much as I do and still have anything nice to say about a phone backed by John Scully, the man who reportedly forced Jobs out of Apple 30 years ago? Do I hold a grudge? Yes, I do. But I will try to remove my personal bias and say, maybe I can say that it's a pretty phone. It is pretty. Coming up, we'll talk distraction, notifications, and brainwaves with professional smart guy Jonathan Strickland. But first, this episode is brought to you by Braintree, a full-stack payment solution for your mobile app. Who uses Braintree? Uber, for one, also Airbnb. All kinds of organizations use Braintree to accept payments in mobile apps and websites, from startups and garages to not-for-profits to some of the largest online retailers. Braintree has more experience working with new business models than any other payments provider. If you're a mobile app developer, check out Braintree. With excellent customer service and simple integration, Braintree gets you ready to receive payments quickly. What if you're not sure how your customers are going to pay? No problem. With Braintree, you can accept PayPal, Apple Pay, Bitcoin, Venmo, cards, and whatever is next, all with a single integration across all platforms with superior fraud protection, customer service, and fast payouts. To learn more and for your first $50,000 in transactions fee-free, go to braintreepayments.com/technight. Our guest today is Jonathan Strickland from How Stuff Works in the Forward Thinking podcast. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's nice to have you back. So you and your Forward Thinking co-host recently did a great show on notifications, which I thought would make a good discussion for us today. I get notifications on my watch, on my phone, on my desktop. I even have this handy device called a Dottie. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it gives me notifications. Right now, I think I'm getting an iMessage. And I feel like all these notifications are making me much more productive. What do you think?
I think you are possibly in the 97.5% of people who are not productive when these sort of things are going on. Just the odds are in my favor is what I'm getting at. Yeah, so it turns out that notifications, I mean, this is no surprise to anyone who's actually experienced this. You know that as you're going through, especially if you're concentrating on a task and a notification comes in, it can completely distract you from the task at hand. And it can really slow you down quite a bit. Back in 2010, you probably heard about the study from the University of Utah that specifically looked at what they called super taskers. They determined that only 2.5% of the world's population are actually adept at multitasking. The rest of us are terrible. Some of us are deluded and think we're good, but we're terrible.
I think I'm deluded.
I realize I'm terrible. I knew that already. But yeah, it turns out that a lot of studies have backed this up. There was one from Carnegie Mellon where they had people driving a virtual vehicle. It was essentially they were using a simulation. And then what they would do is they were being measured by an fMRI that was measuring their brain activity. And they would be subjected to someone speaking to them. All they were doing was listening to someone talk. And the fMRI measured a 37% decrease in their spatial brain activity, which is pretty important when you're operating a vehicle. Yeah. But there are a lot of other examples too. I mean, other studies showed that if you multitask, you commit about twice as many errors as you would if you were focusing on a single task. And it takes you 25% longer to complete all of those tasks together than it would if you were to do them one at a time.
Well, yeah, that driving statistic is scary. It gets back to when you were here last, we were talking about self-driving technology. So that obviously can't come soon enough for us. I was just kidding about being more productive. I kept this on. I've had this device for a while. I reviewed it on one of our shows and I didn't like it. I decided to really try it for a whole work day. And I not only felt less productive, but also really anxious.
Yeah, anxiety levels can really increase too, because notifications don't necessarily come with a piece of metadata that tell you how important they are at any given time. Everything is treated with equal urgency. And that sense of urgency can give us this feeling that we have to respond to everything all the time. Even when we know that there are certain types of communication that are asynchronous, meaning we don't have to be engaged in a conversation at the same time, we feel like we do. And there's something to be said about the culture of the workplace for that. There are some places that I have worked where a person expects an email to be responded to immediately, as opposed to sending like a instant message or something along those lines, or even just coming by or calling. No one calls anymore. I don't even know why I brought that one up. But so notifications are very much the same as multitasking. It's that constant sense of being interrupted when you're trying your best to concentrate on a single task. And our podcast, we looked at a research experiment that was really interesting. A group out of Tufts University designed a system that is meant to measure your brain activity, to feel out when you're really concentrating on a task versus when you have just completed a task. And then it withholds all those notifications until your brain is ready to receive them. So if you're really focused on something, it holds those notifications back. And then once you're finished and you get that feeling of, that's satisfying, I am done, it would read that change in the blood flow of your brain. And then that would allow the algorithm in the filter, which is what the software is called, it's filter with a PH, to send the notifications through. So your brain is now ready to deal with this. And then once you're done dealing with the notifications and you start concentrating again, it puts the block back up so that you don't receive those notifications.
Well, this sounds fantastic and also frightening. How does it know? Is it inside of my brain?
It's not inside, thank goodness. Yeah, you don't have to have invasive brain surgery for this to work. And it doesn't use EEGs. They determined the problem with using an EEG is that your muscle movement can throw off EEG readings. It might read a muscle movement as brain activity. So what they wanted to look at was actual blood flow in the brain. They used a spectroscopy, near infrared spectroscopy. And this is just essentially using infrared waves that can penetrate about 3 centimeters into your head and read the blood flow. And blood flow lags behind brain activity by a few seconds. So if I start concentrating on something, it doesn't tend to get reflected in my blood flow until a few seconds later, which means that this technology would not be good for us to have like mind control over robotics because it's too slow. There's too much lag. But for something like just detecting what you're doing, like whether you're focusing or not focusing, it's perfectly fine. And that's what they're using. And it actually has 2 sensors. There's one on the forehead. That's what's reading the brain activity, but it also picks up some muscle activity. And then there's one that you clip to your earlobe, and that is also to pick up muscle activity. And then it can filter out the muscle information and leave just the brain activity to be the information that the system uses to determine whether or not you're concentrating or if you're goofing off.
Okay, I have a couple more questions. This sounds less terrifying, more interesting, but not very fashionable. Is it like a little hat that this comes in and an earbud type thing, or how would this work? How would it look like?
Let me ask you something. How do you feel about headbands?
I feel okay about them on women.
Yeah, ever since Olivia Newton-John's video for Let's Get Physical, I have been a big fan of the headband fashion accessory. Also, not having hair, having a headband to catch sweat, very useful. No, these are not fashionable. You would probably think if you walked into an office with a bunch of people wearing these, your first thought would probably be, I need to be somewhere else right now. It is not necessarily something that I think most people would ever consider comfortable in a setting where you've got other people looking at you. So that's the biggest drawback, is this is a technology that could work, but I don't know that it's something people would necessarily want to adopt, especially, we tend to like to keep our desks fairly clear of lots and lots of different pieces. This is one more thing you would have to have, one more peripheral you would need to use with your computer. And that's not terribly attractive either. So it's an interesting idea. I don't think this particular implementation is going to go much further than the research phase.
Well, let me ask you, there's one part of it I don't understand. It sounds like what you're saying is that as soon as I am not focused anymore, then it sends me this notification. But that's my problem. When I'm working and I'm not focused, then I know I'm not focused, and that's why I go check Facebook.
Well, the idea is that's another issue. That's like an attention span problem, right?
Yes.
So, and attention span problems are not really addressed by what the Tufts University folks were looking at. We've actually seen a decrease in attention span, according to the National Laboratory. They said that it was around 12 seconds in 2000 and now is closer to 8 seconds. So we've seen a decrease in attention span since then. So that's an issue. But that unfortunately can't be addressed by this particular technology. What they're assuming is that if you're really focused on a task, you're trying to complete something, then your brain activity will reflect that. And it's only when you are done or when you are ready for a break that it would allow those notifications to come through. If you're a person who just has trouble focusing in the first place, that technology is not going to help you. It's only going to help you if you can concentrate for bursts, and then you only get the notifications when you take a break. If you're taking a break on your own, it's kind of just an enabler, I guess.
So I used to not be the kind of person that was really distracted, but now most of my job is, going through Twitter, looking at Facebook, reading through stories after story, so many in a day. Do you think that's changing my brain? And changing all of our brains? Is that how we consume information?
Well, brains are certainly plastic, meaning that they are adaptive. And it probably does change your brain somewhat, but this is the thing about neuroscience. The one thing we really know is that we don't know very much. So whether or not it's making any permanent changes to your brain, that's one question. But it's more likely that it's affecting you in certain situations for as long as you are engaged in those situations. It's probably not something that is going to affect you to the point where it's irreversible. And it's probably not something that's going to be passed down from one generation to another. It's the technology that enables us to have these kind of behavioral changes. So in other words, it's more of a nurture approach than a nature approach. But our brains are combinations of both of those things. And it's so complicated that it's not really responsible of anyone to say, hey, if you engage in this behavior, it will change your brain. Like it's not the same thing that Nicholas Carr said ages ago, that Google is making us stupid. It's certainly offloaded, the internet and our technology has offloaded a lot of the necessity for us to remember various pieces of information. Like I could barely rattle off 2 or 3 phone numbers at this point. But I don't think we're getting to a phase where we can say definitively every generation after our own is going to be even more inept if they are away from their technology.
Right. Well, it's a good point. I mean, there's so many, you point this out in the podcast, there's so many armchair psychologists out there on the internet just saying, here's all the things technology is doing to you and our kids. And a lot of it is just, trying to get our attention.
Yeah, a lot of it is not based on any sort of empirical evidence. And until there are reputable studies that are also replicable so that we know that different teams have tested the same thing and come to the same conclusions, I always caution people from making these sort of grand pronouncements one way or the other, because that's not how science really works.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And if anyone wants to learn more, you can listen to the whole podcast at How Stuff Works and FWthinking.com and watch Jonathan's videos and his audio podcast. And of course, you're on Twitter at John Strickland. Anywhere else people can find you?
Gosh, I'm all over the place. I will say this. If you're interested in 3 idiots who are experimenting with this idea of eliminating any sort of notifications and distractions in order to engage in an activity, in this case, watching terrible movies, you should check out Podcast Without Pretense, because that's what we do. We have actually gotten this show where we eliminate any chance of a distraction and find out how long we can dedicate our attention to some of the worst movies ever made.
Well, I will definitely check that out. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Take care.
Thank you.
And finally, last night, I talked to Recode's Mark Bergen about the California drone bill. Today, Bergen reported that the bill has officially moved to the governor's desk. Now, one of the things I said on this episode was that I felt that privacy and trespassing concerns about drones were valid, but some of the safety concerns were a little exaggerated. TN2 viewer Kevin wrote in to say, seems like the coverage here on TN2 was biased in favor of drones or unmanned vehicles, especially given recent incidents where they are flying at illegal altitudes 1,000 feet or so and nearly crash into air ambulance helicopters. Really should come down harder on the side of safety when it comes to flight. Hard to see another side of the story on this issue. Thanks for your email, Kevin. I am biased. I will say I'm in favor of this technology when it's used responsibly. I don't support drones getting in the way of firefighters or ambulances, but I think the statistics are a little exaggerated by people who are anti-drone biased. I spoke to Twit host and drone expert Father Robert Balasar about drone safety stats in general. He quoted me some stats from the ATF, the NTSB, and the FAA. He said, since the release of the DJI Phantom in 2013, which is largely responsible for the popularization of consumer drones, there has not been a single fatality or aerial collision. In the same time, there have been more than 90,000 gun deaths and 100,000 vehicle deaths. In that same time period, there have been 13 mid-air crash fatalities that were not drone-related and 3,777 runway incursions. And that is it for this edition of Tech News Tonight. You can subscribe to the show at twit.tv/TN2. You can write to us at tn2@twit.tv. And you can watch live every weekday at 4 p.m. Pacific. Don't miss our morning news program, Tech News Today, every weekday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. If you want to join the conversation, we're on Facebook. You can find us on Facebook at Tech News Tonight. And I am Megan Maroney. Thanks for watching.
Bandwidth for Tech News Tonight is brought to you by Cashfly.com.